Hey, Paco, good to see you again. Hey, Philip, good to see you as well. Thanks for coming on in. Here comes June. Hey, June, thanks for coming on. How did your discussion go? Did you just finish up a little bit ago for your EOS Ignite discussion? If you can hear me okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it was good. We kind of just discussed second layer governance solutions, just started conversations around that. So that was that was just really it. So we discussed something called ULEX, ULEX. It's an open source governance platform that was created by a guy named Tom Bell, and then we had discussions. Marcin, who's with Tokenica, also dropped in to discuss just like a smart contract where you could essentially you'd be in a different jurisdiction, and then you could kind of convert back and forth back into EOS once you're outside that jurisdiction. And so that kind of idea too. So anyway, so those were a couple things we discussed. So it was outside constitutional study. So, but just thinking more about like if we have second layer governance, what it'll look like. So,
yeah, you guys are. That's a good choice to discuss that. Obviously, that's the thing we'll eventually need. Nice. I hadn't heard about Tom Bell's Ulix. I wasn't familiar with that. I'll have to go back and watch your recording.
Yeah, let me just give you the link to they did a recent Indiegogo campaign, and they raised, I think, maybe 20,000 or something, and just to start the initiative. So let me just put that in the chat window here. Here it goes. It's the Indiegogo campaign.
If you have the Cynthia that you are talking about, Marcin, John, that's is that recorded?
Yeah, sure. It's being uploaded.
I'd love to hear about that. I think that guy has really good ideas. Marcin is really awesome. The stuff he
no, I agree. I think he was kind of leading the effort for second layer governance for a while now. So I think it's great to see him. He's working on that smart contract to allow that feature. So it's exciting to see what they come up with, and I think it'd be very useful.
Yeah, I like Marcin again as well. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's awesome. Actually, we met I met him personally in London, and it is extremely intelligent and very easygoing. It's easy to argue with him. And there's people that you can argue and you have different positions, but you kind of dislike him. It's impossible to dislike Marcin.
Okay.
Even though you disagree with him, you still like him. You know what I mean? He has a very nice approach. So it's
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Are you guys coming to San Francisco for the hackathon? Any of you guys?
I'm trying. I'm going to Oslo for sure. But my partner will be there. Because I have a Chinese partner, Martin. He will be there, and also we do have part of our tech team is based in San Francisco.
Oh, really?
So they're gonna build a team. Yeah, they're gonna build.
I should. I'm in the Bay Area, Paco. If you could, I'd love to connect with everybody in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you could. Let me know.
He's Chinese, but he studied in Berkeley, and he stayed in the States. So he's been there for a long time. As far as I know, I think he's got the American passport at this stage.
Okay,
he's
wow.
Our data guy. He's the guy that sets up all our EOS systems, and cool guy, really cool guy. So I'll definitely hook you up with him. And he's always into this. So if you're gonna talk to him about technology, he's gonna be very keen in meeting you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So yeah, I should get your info, Paco. I don't know. Maybe on Telegram is probably good.
Yeah, you have me on Telegram.
Yeah, I could find you. I could find
well,
you.
no, I send you my handle right now through the chat, and you can contact me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, is he the dev that did that vote tracker website?
No, that's fun. That's our main guy. He's in Shanghai.
Oh, okay.
And 23. He's extremely young. He's coming out next week or following week. He's gonna come out with the software that we are testing right now. Is a sync for developers. And so far, to everybody that we gave the tool to, everybody's jumping. He's got a lot of future.
Him or the tool? Or both? I just put it in votetracker.io, right? I put it in the chat there. People can take a look if they haven't seen it. I think Paco actually froze. His internet might have cut out. Yves LaRose, welcome back, man. Good to see you.
Sorry about being late. The link wasn't working for me. It was giving me an international numbers list for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it worked afterwards. And I gotta say, like, Paco frozen like that looks pretty amazing. His glasses are really pimping. And you've got like his tattoo arm sticking out and everything. We should take a picture of this.
This should be his new Telegram, icon. Yeah, let's dive in. I'd love to tackle Article 12 on this version 3 proposal we talked about it last week. We tried to bring it up in the call this morning. It's hard to make progress on, but the dispute resolution article. I'll put up the proposal from EOS Amsterdam here in the chat. Actually, the Korean community finished revising their draft, so we're getting it translated now and hoping to have it up by this weekend, maybe, so you guys can start looking at that as well, deciding how they did and what we need to help with them with going forward. Let's see here. Here's the link there in the chat. Put up the Amsterdam proposal, at least the latest link I can find that I have. I understand there may be a more recent one, but I haven't seen it. And this is the public consultation one. So I'll share my screen. We'll go down to Article 12 if you guys have it pulled up. Yeah, we have an anonymous frog who's also on Article 12. You can take a minute and just go ahead and read it. Get some thoughts. Any immediate thoughts that jump to mind? You guys work your way through this.
The one that I find really difficult to understand properly is 12.3. Just at first glance, that's the one that, because it goes back to the block producers meeting, which I guess I don't agree with the block producers meeting, so it doesn't help. But if anybody here does agree with the block producers meeting and can explain 12.3, that'd be really appreciated.
The block producers meeting, I think it was Article 7. We'll go up there real quick. Take a look here. No, maybe it was block producers. I know recently he said that he had removed the block producer meeting. Maybe he took it out of this draft. Let's see here. And maybe he just missed it in the Article 12 section. There's Paco. Welcome back, Paco.
So I guess part of what is difficult for me with this particular dispute resolution proposal is it seems like the block producers always have veto over whatever's happening somehow. And even if I go look, so a concrete example would be 12.4.1 and 12.4.2. So I guess first of all, I don't understand what it means by a selected arbitration provider can only be removed without its consent. So if they say, I don't want to be an arbitration provider anymore, they can't. They can't remove themselves. That's kind of weird. I don't really, and I'm sure that that's not what that means, but that's how I read it. And then if we look at 12.4.1 and 0.2, again, everything links back to these block producers meetings and whether or not the block producers basically have all the say and all the power over these arbitration forums. So I'm not sure I understand that very well.
It seems to resonate with the common thought about Dan's proposal with the intent of Coda's law. It gave the block producers all the power.
Sorry, guys, I ran out of battery and I missed. Where are we?
Hey, Paco.
We talked about how cool you looked while you were frozen. The pose that you had was amazing, and then your glasses, your tattoo armed, and everything was awesome. We just started looking at Article 12, the dispute resolution, and then when we go down to, go for it, Paco.
We are back on version 3, yeah.
Yeah, okay, Kevin posted the link.
Great.
So again, if we go down 12.5 again, I think that the idea, and I'd asked that to Yetzi before, and he did reply in the comments, how broad or how detailed we want to go. And then if we look at 12.5 and all the sub articles of 12.5.1 all the way down, I have issues with the trying to be specific, but still in a way being vague. And what I mean by that would be, what's a good example? 12.5.1, ensure the strict independence of the arbitrator. That's fairly simple. But then 12.5.3, charge fees that are reasonable. So who decides what's reasonable? What's a reasonable fee? And then is it the block producers that decide? Is it the arbitration pools themselves? Because for a user, any fee will be unreasonable. If you stole my tokens, or if the intent is that I feel wronged, a reasonable fee is 0. Get me my money back for 0. And then where does that reasonable line stop? So I think that trying to be detailed like that might bring more confusion than anything else. And the overall sentiment that I'm getting is we should be less. We should be developing a constitution that's less big in size and a little bit more broad, less specific like this. Because then, if not, you get into the different intentions and the different meanings and definitions of more content.
So what you're saying is that the content itself it's what can confuse the issue, having too much content. Because one thing that I kind of seen on version 1, and we've seen that is on both Constitution and on the Reg producer is agreement is people could really look at it in whatever way they wanted it. You know what I mean? It wasn't as specific as we probably needed.
So for example, let's say we were to say that Article 12 is we want dispute resolution, and I'm not sure how you'd word that. But instead of going through everything that dispute resolution entails, I think the idea that I've heard more frequently is say that you want dispute resolution, and then in another document, you would lay about what the dispute resolution process is, how it works, kind of the business plan and the whole overall plan, so that if ever you wanted to make changes to that because it didn't work out or it didn't make sense or it wasn't specific enough, you could make those changes without going and affecting the Constitution or the Charter. But right now, if we let's say if this were to go in, and then we looked at the 12.5.3, and we'd be arguing what's a reasonable fee to charge, then we say, okay, we need to specify what's a reasonable fee. We need to go back and change this charter again. Instead of just changing the linking document, in our case right now, which would be the RDR, or it'd be any kind of accompanying document that wouldn't need to go through referendum again to get changed, because the constitution itself or the charter itself would simply say, we want, I have no idea how it would say that, but we want dispute resolution, and we have dispute resolution. And then it would link to whatever then is very specific. So I know that in Canadian law and Canadian government, the way that we work this out is through acts and through regulations, and each one of them gets more and more and more precise. But the one at the top is really the intent. So the one that gets passed by government, or the one that gets passed in our level of parliaments, is something that's very broad. So people agree that we should have X, but how to actually enforce that, or how to actually do it, is done through a series of other documents. But that intent doesn't need to go back to Parliament every time. So it's the rules of how to enforce or how to enact such law that then goes and gets reworked. The policies themselves get reworked, but that never needs to go back to government. So if right now we're looking at the charter or the constitution that Yetzi's proposed, because it's so precise, if ever we wanted to make changes to it, we'd have to go back to referendum every time. And that's why I think maybe this brings about issues, especially when it comes to dispute resolution, because it tries to be so specific without really being probably specific enough, if that makes any sense.
It's one of the things that I thought of this last week when we spoke with Ian, and we've talked a lot about dispute resolution and a huge amount about arbitration, but we spoke very little about the rules of dispute resolution. It seems that nobody is wanting to look at those rules, because it seems that the whole war is, do we have arbitration or we don't have arbitration, instead of do we have dispute resolution or not. And those rules are left the way they are right now in ECAF. And basically, no matter if you get rid of ECAF, you still have the RDR. So I don't know when or how or when this conversation is going to come out.
Well, I guess the way that it's currently done is, in the current constitution, it links to the RDRs. You could change the RDRs without going for referendum or without going to constitution, because it wouldn't be changing the constitution, right? So if we have issues with the way that people are enacting, it's slightly different, because ECAF is following through on what the constitution is. So then there are other issues with that. For example, definition of Article 1 or Article 3. Or any other articles. But if you wanted to change on how the rules are laid out and what happens and how you actually go about and do the work, that's all laid out in the RDRs. The RDRs can be modified right now. My understanding is the RDRs could be modified right now without going for referendum.
Who can modify them?
I'm not sure who would do it, but my understanding is it's technically possible. You'd have to suffer the wrath of the community afterwards if they didn't like it. But I don't think you would need to go through referendum, which is the key difference. You wouldn't go through the whole process of government again.
I think that we should anyway think that arbitration is the last resort.
Oh, definitely.
We're going to have an awful lot of other things. I totally agree that we should have automatic dispute resolution systems like the way eBay and a lot of people has, and arbitration left as the last resort. When we cannot resolve it through any other way, then we go to arbitration. And I don't think people is actually thinking of that. They're just thinking arbitration. They've got this big ball in their heads made of this is going to be wrong, it's going to be bad, and this is going to be, everything is going to go into a kind of court situation, when many of the situations can be probably solved with when we know an automatic dispute resolution system.
I think Eve wrote an article about that, about how we only think about arbitration. And
yeah, I didn't really gain favors by writing those articles. My opinion gets me in trouble
Well,
quite frequently. But the idea, but you're right. The idea, Paco, is that right now, when and you said it even like a couple of minutes ago, the idea right now is not how we want to enact dispute resolution, is even do we want to have dispute resolution or not, seems to be at the core of a lot of the arguments that have been in the discussion and the back and forth that's been going on for the last couple of months now, is do we even want the possibility of having this or not? Once that question is answered, so yes or no, if the answer is yes, then okay, how? That's a completely different thing. How do we do this? And so that's why I'm saying right now is in the constitution that's being proposed, we could write it in a way that it's basically just a yes or a no. So if it's in there, it's because it's a yes. If we remove that article, it's because it's a no. So if you look at V2, it does have an article that effectively says no. In this one, this Article 12 is effectively saying yes. What I'm thinking is it's too precise. And that what should happen is that it should just be the yes or no portion, however that's phrased or that's worded as an article. And then the how is in a different document, such as it currently is with the current constitution, because the RDR is a different document that's referred to in the constitution, but it's not the constitution itself.
Yeah, the nature of these discussions and decisions may change a lot here coming in the coming weeks when the referendum system does come out, and we can hopefully run kind of a push and get people more interested in doing stuff on chain, and we can do some polling on chain, and then we can pose those kind of questions, and that might hopefully influence the way these charters or constitutions are written before they're proposed to put to referendum for an actual vote.
June did write something that's really interesting. He said specific RDR should be declared. Agreed. Otherwise, whoever can change the RDR has power. Agreed. What I'm saying is if in the Constitution you point to the RDR, and then but then if you want to make changes to your RDR, you don't need to put the Constitution up for referendum anymore. You can just go rework the RDRs. And if we think that we need referendum to change that, good. But then we're just having a referendum on that and not on the whole Constitution again. So you're putting it into different levels so that you never need to go back to the highest level to change one of the bottom articles.
We should have, anyway, we should have a way to be able to change certain parts of the Constitution, not the whole thing. I wasn't aware that this wasn't a possibility. A possibility. It doesn't make sense having to change the whole Constitution. It maybe in 6 months' time we realize the Article 3, just to say a number, is not good for us. So we have to change, revote again the whole thing, or we can go for just that article.
In that case, what kind of suggestions should we make here on Yetzi's document indicating that?
I guess the way that I see it, because I'm in Canada, so I can only speak about the words that I have at my disposal here and the context that I am. In Canada, we have policies, regulations, and laws. Policies are incredibly detailed. They tell you exactly what to do, how to do it. They're typically, like, policies will be 50 pages long. And then the policies will link to a regulation. The regulation will be more detailed. It'll elaborate on the intent, but it won't be as detailed as to specifically tell somebody who's going to enact the policy itself what to do line by line, but it'll be specific enough to be able to understand. And then the law itself is really not specific. It defines the intent without necessarily saying how it's going to happen. So what I'm suggesting is that we have something similar. So a law, regulation, policy. So the law would be the Constitution, the Charter. So it elaborates the intent, but it doesn't necessarily say exactly how you're going to do it. Then you have something that's a little bit lower, which would be similar to the regulations, where it goes into more detail to elaborate on the intent and potentially who's at work, who's at play, who are the different stakeholders, et cetera, and kind of what all the different pieces are. But it doesn't necessarily say exactly line by line what you need to do. And then the policies, those are what let's say if you're a federal worker, if you're a public servant, that's what you follow line by line when referring to laws or when referring to regulations as to what you need to do specifically. So if we went like this, whenever you want to make changes to policies in Canada, you don't go back to Parliament. So you have each department that will then change their policies, because the level of executive power that's required in order to change those policies isn't as high as going back to the prime minister. If you want to change regulations, so if you want to change policies, it'll be at a, let's say, medium level of hierarchy. If you want to change regulations, then typically you need to go back to Parliament, but only at the lower chamber. If you want to change the laws, then you need to go back to the full government. So you still have accountability, and you're still not able to change anything just by yourself and just do it because you want to do it. But the level of, I guess, the level of referendum in our case, or who would be able to change that in our case, would be able to point that depending on where it falls in the hierarchy of policy, regulation, or law. That's what I would suggest with it specifically. I think it applies very well to dispute resolution in this case.
I think that system makes sense in general. I think in the U.S. it's similar, except you can take a different perspective with the U.S. in that really and I kind of it's a different perspective to take about what the Constitution means. It's a different philosophical perspective, but the idea is that the U.S. Constitution really limits the powers of what the government can do. So everything that's written in the Constitution is like, okay, this is what government can do, and it just enumerates that. So once you have that, then it's like you can at a policy or regulation level, you can write whatever you want. It just can't conflict with the powers that are given in the Constitution for them to do that. So really, it's like, the Constitution is just really to limit their powers, and otherwise you could write all the regulation you want, you could write all the policies you want. If there's a conflict, you actually go back to the courts, and they say, hey, this conflicts with the Constitution, you can't do this. Agreed. And then you go back and say, so then there's a lot of regulation and policy that's actually very unconstitutional, that's just remains in the books. In the U.S. and I'm sure probably in
everywhere around the world, and you're always trying to fix that, right? So you're in this constant loophole of trying to fix.
And so it's always like the kind of the Supreme Courts in I don't know what in Canada you have, but in the federal courts.
Yeah, we have a Supreme Court as well. Yeah.
Okay, so the same process. They're the ones that decide, okay, is this constitutional or not. And so but anyways, the incentive for government, I think in general, is to expand their powers and write everything that they can. And it's almost like then the Constitution's a check on that. So anyways, but as far as this particular Constitution is concerned, we could probably take a similar perspective about policy and regulation. And I just feel like that's the thing that also worries me. I'm very much for just very minimal and less bureaucratic systems in general, especially at this early stage, and actually in general.
EOS is incredibly bureaucratic already. Yeah. We're not making changes until we go to referendum.
Yeah. Sure. So but going back to Kevin, going back to 12, I'm reading this, and I wish I had kind of read it earlier, but it seems to me like, and if someone can clarify, it seems to me that it's there's no specific arbitration forum that's designated in this Constitution. It's more like they want to keep it open for like a kind of create a free market of arbitration. And that the block producers will almost decide which ones out of those that register on chain, the handful of, let's say, arbitrators and arbitration are RDRs that are acceptable. It seems. I gotta reread this, but can someone clarify that? Is it so? There's definitely not an ECAF specified here. And if you look at 12.2, and 12.3, it seems as though they're saying, okay, well, let's have a process for the BPs to decide which arbitration forms, which RDRs are acceptable. And so that's okay, wait, so there's something highlighted there too, so that I missed. So maybe I'll just read that what's online right now. So
that was part of what I was saying earlier. I'm not sure I understand if this BP meeting is going to be determining who's an arbitration form or not, or if the intent was to use something similar to what EOS New York proposed, where you register as a form or you register as an arbitrator, and then that's what's being used by the BPs. Or that's why I'm not sure I understand what the intent is here. It would be really great to have Yetzi so that he could, I know we said this last week, exact same thing. Maybe Kevin, I don't know if he's still listening, but it'd be great to have maybe inviting Yetzi on one of these calls so that we could just straight up ask what the intent was. And then maybe we all understand and it's super easy and there's no problems.
I think anyway, the arbitration should be decided, who do you want as arbitrator should be decided between the parts.
It does leave provision for that, if I'm not mistaken.
No one else. BPs have nothing to say in there. You know, if the two parts agree that the arbitrator is you, Yves, and nobody once you are an arbitrator, why not?
So Paco, yeah, I think that is in 12.1 that addresses the standard case, which is hopefully 90+ % of cases where everyone is selecting their arbitrators or each party and agreeing. But I think the 12.2 is if there's, it starts with it in the event that no other form has been agreed to by the parties. So that means those cases that they're either someone, who hasn't designated an arbitrator. I'm slowing down here a little bit. Then that's the I guess the process for those cases where you have to identify a kind of another process, or you have to create another process for those cases. So yeah, for the most part, yeah, it's just relying on.
That's also when the rules of dispute resolution comes in. Is once you have a set of rules that we all have agreed, doesn't matter who is the arbitrator, because it's the rules what we have agreed with. So if two parts don't have an arbitrator and don't know what arbitrator to choose, what I would suggest is that the VPs, what they can do is to offer an array of arbitrators that have accepted and they're gonna judge you with the rules of dispute resolution that we've all have agreed. So that will take away a lot of problems in here. The problem is not the arbitrator, is the rules that we're gonna use that the arbitrators are gonna use to see each case. And that's what I think that we should agree.
Yeah, that might be what Yetzi is, and this is trying to describe. Maybe it's pretty similar. As far as I know, I need to reread it a couple more times. But Paco, it may be like.
I'll tell you something. I've read a few times, and since I'm not a lawyer, I pick up parts, and some parts I just don't get them. But I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot blame him for doing his job of writing as a lawyer what he has wrote. It's me that don't get it very well.
Yeah, so I do think maybe we should get him on to clarify some of these details, because
why has it been called to come, Kevin, or is?
No, I haven't reached him. No, in fact, next week we may have to have this call a little earlier to be able to have him on, and that way it can work for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably asleep, is what Justin was saying. So we'll shoot for that next week as well. We're going to have the Korean Constitution, Korean community produced Constitution as well, that we can have him look at and talk us through and get a lot of questions answered, hopefully.
Is that translated already or still not?
They just finished revising it, so it's being translated now.
Great.
Yeah, probably sometime this weekend, we're hoping it'll be ready.
They probably come out with something a lot better than everybody of us, so I hope.
they've had a lot of calls together, and they're like hours and hours together revising it. So it's been impressive how hard they've been working. Like 15 folks from the Korean community. It's been great.
That's serious work.
Yeah.
That's great. What about the Chinese community? I know there were supposed to be like a lot of working groups that formed, and so I just haven't heard lately how much progress they've made.
Mostly just discussions. There hasn't been any strong leadership presence. We're still trying to hopefully cultivate a leader to take charge and be able to lead the charge on making the Constitution. We're not really trying to take leadership position and drive that forward, but hopefully cultivate someone who will do it. And that is what they need at this point. So if you know anyone who would be very passionate about running, sort of saying, hey, here is a draft we need to work on. Let's do this, this, and this, and they can assign tasks. Certainly let us know. We can hopefully help you reach out and get the ball rolling on that. But very passionate group, that's for sure. The Chinese community.
It's great.
Really agree with that. I'll link it right here in the chat. It's the Korean version, but you can at least read the titles of each article. Those are in English and Korean.
All right.
And there's the put it up in the chat. Some of the titles you can read.
I think that we are all looking for the same thing, but we're not managing to find a way to simplify this process.
Agreed. Yes. Hopefully those. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the referendum tool, the polling tools will be helpful. And even if we don't get a huge turnout for each question, at least maybe we have 1,000 people that answer a question, and that's good enough, right? If you didn't answer it, then you lost your chance. Or we can do it later on. But all these various questions, like should we have subjective language? Should the effects of dispute resolution be minimized? Should we mostly follow intent of code? Those kind of questions can be put to a wider poll, and then we can more easily craft a constitution that everybody would like based on that. So that's hopefully why in the coming weeks, some of this may change as those tools suddenly become available.
Yeah, I think I was mentioning that the Korean Constitution looks very short, which is great. Without knowing the content, I guess it looks pretty short, which is something I like. But maybe it's the language. Maybe they can condense a lot more content in a smaller number of characters. So, but anyway, so I was also gonna think like there's a lot of constitutions floating around. Yetzi's Korean. I'm assuming the Chinese will come up with one. I created kind of a draft of another. So I'm wondering if it'd be good to kind of get together with in a group to discuss kind of the intent of all of these and just the design principles as you guys mentioned earlier, right? In the beginning of the process. So maybe it'd be good at some point in time, whether it's next week or in a couple of weeks, to have not a convention necessarily, but just a kind of meeting of the minds about the various versions, just to see where everyone's going, what directions everyone's kind of taking the Constitution, and then we could kind of break apart again, and then just kind of just rethink things, and then I don't know, maybe the referendums are coming up pretty quickly, so I don't know what kind of time pressure we're on. So
I agree with that completely. That's kind of what we were thinking. That's what we kind of decided on earlier. We did the English and Chinese call about 12 hours ago. About 8 hours ago, rather, 9 hours. And so we talked about that a little bit, how next week we will look into taking the Korean version, the Korean Community Constitution. Once it's translated, we can sort of take a look at the intent and the design principles. compare and contrast, and we may be able to merge the two in some way. And that process will take a few weeks, surely. It's likely that the whole process will go longer than 12 weeks, I would say. It seems very high percentage chance of that happening. But that's all right, as long as we get something that is a very good draft that most people can agree on and get quickly passed through referendum. That's the main point. So that should be coming either next week or the week after, or probably both weeks. We'll be looking at trying to merge those or find out what the intent is. Need to get Yetse on the call, need to get some of those Korean community leaders on the same call as well with a good translator.
Yeah, and then the only thing I would add to that is, the design principles really kind of make a big difference about what the Constitution is about. So it's almost like if there's different, like just if, for example, V1 is very different from V2 in terms of the principles. So we can't really, it's hard to merge them, right? Because they conflict in ways, right? Like you have base layer and you have one without, right? So I would say, like, I guess you could merge some aspects of it, but sometimes I think it's almost like it's probably pretty hard sometimes, if depending on the principles, to merge a lot of the articles. So I think it's okay. It's just whatever people really, I think, resonate towards in terms of, it could, it's just a good discussion to have, and then decide, okay, well, I kind of like, something that's closer to V2, or something's closer to V1 or whatever it is, like we'll start to kind of consolidate. But yeah, the only thing is, like, I would think, like, we don't want a Frankenstein constitution, where we're taking piecemealing things together and it's just like not like coherent in the end, So that's just my only input on that. So
is there someone from V1 gonna explain the V2 constitution, or defend it, or talk to us about it? Or
so we have reached out to V1 a few times, and they take the very hands-off approach, as always. There's a lot of legal issues going on there, which we all sort of know some parts of. But yeah, they have such a strong legal team that recommends they don't really get involved in any way. So it ends up being tough for them to
get. Don't get involved in any way, and you already did it. You wrote that constitution. Might as well just, that constitution is still in that webpage. I see that good, that we should hear from their mouths what's behind the same way that we're going to talk about design for V1 and V3 and the Korean and the Chinese and as many as we can. It'd be very good to listen. And if he's done even better, because he's seeing the evolution of the last 3 months and he probably has some new input. I'm sure that the way he's already has new ideas about that constitution.
I agree with that completely. And I think part of it too is when he wrote that, he didn't listen to his legal team. He just punched it out, and then they had to deal with the mess afterwards.
My friend.
I think he's been reined in a little bit since he did that. It was a Dan moment that he just went and did it. So yeah, I think that's part of the complication. I mean, obviously he has different ideas nowadays, I'm sure, like you said. So we'll try to reach out to them again, but we can't expect too much from them. They're going to take that hands-off approach and probably continue to do that as software writers, mostly developers. And June, I agree with what you're saying. And that's probably the first question is what we say, hey, is it even possible to merge these two constitutions? Yes or no, right? And it seems likely it could be no, just given how short that Korean constitution is. It seems like it's more, from having talked to them a lot over the past few weeks, they're more about the intent of code style constitution with minimal oversight. So we'll see if it's even possible. And if it's not, then we will have two revised constitutions that will go up for referendum. It could be the Amsterdam one and the Korean community one, and maybe the Chinese one and all the other ones too.
And anybody has ever talked about starting with a very short, basic idea and let's see how it works and develop as it comes. As we find the problems, then we can go back to, instead of right now trying to build a constitution is going to protect us forever of every trouble that we're going to have forever, which we don't even know what problems we're going to have. Has anyone spoke about that or?
Well, I think that needs to be a very strong article in whatever constitution comes out, is how to modify this constitution. kind of like what we were talking about earlier. You know, do we need to have a referendum for every single small change, or can there be certain parts of the policy that are written by, say, ECAF, for example? You know, like the RDR right now. I'm guessing ECAF could edit the RDR right now if they wanted to. I don't know what their full scope of power is over that, but you know, the less important stuff doesn't need to be a community consensus every time. Doesn't need to go to a full poll every time.
Yeah, and then so I think to follow up, yeah, Paco, I think there has been talk about keeping a minimalist constitution for exactly that reason, because you know, if when things do come up, we can add to it when we have significant problems. So I assume that that's one maybe design principle to keep things very limited and only, you know, just keep anything that's really necessary in the beginning, so that when things come up, there is a danger though that you keep adding to it, you know, even on any event. And there's always like the idea that, you know, you have this living constitution that is all, it kind of starts to snowball is also a concern of mine. But there has been talk about that. One of the things, Kevin, I wanted to talk about is because you kind of, you know, you mentioned about like what needs to be changed. Eve talked about this, and then I think, so parameters, I mean, Rex is an example. The biggest thing I try to kind of add to in the kind of the version v2.1 that you know, I kind of helped draft is the idea that these parameters like inflation, even BP compensation and the process of electing BPs, things like Rex, I think they actually should be in the Constitution because they're very significant features and parameters, and any change really changes the nature of the blockchain. And my argument also is that blockchain governance in the crypto world is really just about how to upgrade these features. Nothing to do with what we're talking about arbitration, and we're going way beyond like what typically people discuss in blockchain governance. You know, if you look at Tezos, Decred, they're trying to do is have a process to resolve block sizes, right? Like how big to increase a block size. And so anyway, so that's why I feel like all the parameters features we do have that are significant, like inflation and even the process, like the Rex and even the account name auctions and things like that. I think that's significant enough that you do have to put in the Constitution, because that's a very that's foundational to how the system works. So anyway, so that's my case for not like, I think the concern is like sometimes if you have a developer's mindset, you kind of like, you almost want to hack away and, you know, do one feature and another and just test and things. And there's benefit to that. But even if you do that, you have to, I think, know what the foundation of the current system is and have like buy-in to change it. And so I think almost any of these changes, especially like big changes like Rex, I agree with it, but still I think it has to be put up into referendum, as EOS New York has kind of written about. And so, but yeah, and I say just let's describe the current system contract in at least get a summary version in the Constitution, so that if we do change it, we should go through referendum. And this doesn't mean to say like for optimization and code fixes that you have to add that. It's just, again, like what Eve said, you know, you have this overall kind of just high level statement about what the system is supposed to do. And you can optimize, it could do code fixes, you know, any other, you know, kind of secondary kind of features around it you can kind of change, but the high level shouldn't change. Like the high level parameters, numbers shouldn't change. I mean, the biggest concern is like inflation. It's like 4%. If you don't have that and you somehow get the BPs to do 10%, you know, it's like, that's huge, right? That's like, to me, one of the biggest things in the crypto world, that one of the biggest parameters you can like change. So Anyways.
Yeah, I hear you, definitely. Yeah, having that, separating out those parts that can be changed. I actually saw someone in the Telegram chat earlier in Block Pros mention that, the pseudo contract was put through and was voted on and was actually implemented without any kind of a referendum. And yet we have certain parts that we can't necessarily put through, and like Rex, for example, can't go through without being a referendum.
So I think there's a couple sides to the pseudo, and I would say that that's just a scary term, and I think it should require a referendum to do those kinds of things. But then the flip side, I guess technologically, the BPs, it just makes the BP's job easier to do what they already can do. So that's the argument that has been made to show that it's not as big a deal. So I mean, it's kind of, that's a tricky question, but the idea you're using pseudo, and if you're able to implement that, at least that would scare people. Like, hey, you're just implementing this without like any referendum. Like it would really freak people out that you're able to do something seemingly drastic and not having the kind of community voting on it. So anyway, so I would say at least for that specific thing, I think because of the perception, and if anything, just change the name, just call it like.
It is, the name is different. It's not called pseudo anymore, it's called RAP.
Yeah, they changed.
Okay.
We
cool.
decided that in the London hackathon is when we spoke about that name, it was too heavy.
Okay, cool.
I'm not a dev, so I don't know, but what I understood in London is that what this contract does is something that is a power that the BPs already had anyway.
Okay. In that case, then it's okay. I was like, so, and so I understand that. So maybe it's and maybe, we shouldn't like make a big deal of things that are like based on perception so much than what the actual feature does. And if it's what the BPs already can do with supermajority.
There was a serious talk about it, and it was a few BPs that had a few questions, Marshall from Fish and a few others that weren't very sure if they were against or not. So they actually, we spent almost half of the morning explaining the contract, and everybody kind of saw that it was already, that it was, the only thing that was doing is to allow them to do something that they could do.
Okay. So that's great. Then I won't discuss that part anymore because we don't want to make it bigger than it is, and so, and we're not using pseudo anymore, so that's good. So
RAP.
Yeah, that's partially why too. That's why it's hard to put everything to a poll or a vote or referendum, right? Because something like pseudo, there's a deeper explanation that can't be easily explained to the entire community. And so therefore, something that could be beneficial, people will just go, no, that sounds terrible. We can't do that. So, there needs to be some, like June was saying, needs to be something that, obviously some things that are just sort of decided upon by the people who know best. We just have to sort of assume that the checks and balances are correctly placed so that they can't abuse that power in any way. That's, I think, our primary job when we're trying to write this new constitution.
Yeah. And then, but I think the parameters are very important. So that going back to, optimizations and code and maybe these pseudo things that are not really pseudo, that's okay. But I am very, I'm very kind of strong on the opinion that we should put a lot of these parameters in the Constitution, so that people, it's just, I think it's important. Also, even just the process. I mean, we have, a unique delegated proof of stake system, and it has actually another side benefit that if people read this Constitution, they can kind of get the sense of the most important parameters in the system, like and so rather than having to kind of go dig into the system code and maybe read some blogs here and there, like if the Constitution already describes that because they're important parameters, then you get a better sense of what the blockchain feature set is. So there's a side benefit to having describe that. I know someone had mentioned, I think Thomas mentioned that the original idea was that it's already in system code, so it was unnecessary to explain it again in the Constitution. So I can understand kind of that view, but most people, like, it's something that like, as a voter or a token holder, you know, you need to have all those explicit to be able to make judgments on any future changes, to understand the existing platform. So I think it's necessary to have that. So anyway, so that's the only difference in terms of the kind of the push I was been making, difference between version 1 and 2. I just wanted to make sure, and I've seen it in some of the version 3s, which is good, does explain the inflation rate and certain other aspects. I would even go further and say, okay, you know, explain RAM tokens, explain Rex, explain the account name selling, because I mean that's integral. Like, if you change the auction system for account names, we may not be paying attention, but that's huge, because everyone's like, you know, they're auctioning out premium names right now. And so you don't want to change the economics of a system without like referenda, right? So anyways, so
It was a very good article today from EOS New York, from Kevin, regarding Rex and regarding their proposal that it should be a